Okay, I see a status bar. Are we live now? I see a status bar. Who knows? Maybe we're live.
There we are.
Okay, I think we are live now. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. So my name is Vadim Liberman. I am editor of ERE.net, which is an online publication for talent acquisition professionals. I'm also, as LinkedIn says, the Liberace of HR. So, I'm not going to disappoint you all. I'm wearing some gold lame, maybe lame if you think lame is lame, but more importantly, I have people with me today that are going to outshine me for sure. So I'm going to do a quick round of intros. We have Scott Solomon, who is Senior Client Executive at One Digital, which is an employee benefits agency. Hello, Scott.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Vadim. Great to see everyone.
Yeah. I have Arran Stewart, who is co-founder of Job.com, which helps organizations with their recruitment needs. Arran, hi.
Hello, everybody.
Yep. So next we have Mary Jantsch, head of people operations at Next Move, which is a decision modeling and optimization platform. Hey, Mary.
Hi, everyone. Excited to chat about recruiting.
Yep. And we have Taja Davis-Williams, who is a hiring as a service manager for Jane.HR, which is an HR and recruitment consultancy. So Taja, hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. This is going to be a great conversation. I encourage everyone who's here to post comments, questions in the chat. Maybe you agree with something somebody says, right on, post that. Maybe you disagree and think, maybe Mary or Scott or whoever said something totally bizarre and crazy. Let us know what you disagree with too. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We want to make this interactive and really lively, engaging, informative conversation. So why don't we just dive right in, right? Let's start with just the basics, just to lay a foundation, right? So when you think of recruiting tech and you think of a recruiting tech stack, right? What do you consider the most essential, maybe one or two parts of a recruiting tech stack, maybe besides an applicant tracking system? But maybe you don't think that's essential. I don't know. Scott, why don't you go first? What do you think is essential?
Absolutely. You certainly want to come across showing that you're relative to the culture and the current environment. You don't want to come off seeming pompous or not welcoming. By having, flexibility in work schedules, an up-to-date work from home policy in today's world is certainly important. Advances for growth, having perks I don't know if people are familiar with companies like Fringe or Twick that really differentiate the norm from, the medical dental vision. That's almost, par for the course now. You need to do something that's going to spice up someone's life outside of the workplace, because now the workplace is at home primarily. How do you make their at-home lives better, and how do you make their families' lives better by incorporating them into the overall benefits package?
Yeah, I agree. I think that particularly from an attraction point of view, obviously candidates care about more than just the salary part of their compensation. Benefits matter too. Mary, any thoughts there? What do you consider most essential in the recruiting tech stack?
Yeah, I appreciate you forcing us to think about most essential, because there are a lot that I want to list. But I usually think about recruiting, to oversimplify it, into 4 stages: plan, attract, sell, and evaluate, and then close. And I think the one that I think is most essential, especially for today's recruiting environment, is in that attract bucket. So this is maybe a little bit of a stretch on what qualifies as a tool, but I think having a really clear and thought out employer brand strategy, content strategy, for how you're talking about your company, and thinking really, my past life is in marketing, and so I borrow a lot of marketing metaphors, but literally having a spreadsheet where you're talking about, here is top of the funnel content, middle of the funnel content, and bottom of the funnel content. So that top of the funnel content might be if your product is for developers, maybe you're creating really helpful content for developers, and they're not necessarily at the point where they're thinking about working at your company, but in the future they might be oh yeah, so-and-so creates really great thoughtful content, I want to work there. And bottom of the funnel content being someone who is really interested in working at your company. So those are blog posts like, this is our interview process, this is how we hire, this is what it looks like to grow and develop at our company. But I think that is a tool that is well worth its weight when you can do that well.
So would you just, when you're describing this tool or this set of tools, are you thinking like a traditional sort of recruitment marketing kind of platform or solution?
Yeah, I guess I would name it as really just like a thought out content strategy. So maybe that lives in a spreadsheet, maybe it lives in Notion, maybe it lives in a calendar, but going through that process to really like proactively think about the type of content you want to create. So that content might be on your blog, it might be on social, it might be videos. The medium is kind of up to you, but I think that the tool is just the like content strategy.
Right. And one thing I really like about your answer is that, or like kind of what I was getting from it a little bit, is that there's still the element of creating that strategy, and your technology solution is not going to create that strategy. You as a person are still going to create that strategy. Like technology is not a solution, but it can enable your solutions. So I love where you were going with that. Taja, what do you think? What's most essential in the recruiting tech stack?
Sure. So speaking from a recruitment and talent acquisition side, in addition to an ATS, I think what pairs very well with that is a great sourcing tool. So, you know, when we're talking about sourcing tools, I'm really thinking about efficiency, organization. Hire Tool has been a really helpful tool for that. In my case, it's allowed me to make sure I'm not overlapping messaging per position, per client that I'm working with, since we do work across industries. It allows me to stack my messaging, the timing of that messaging. It's very helpful just in organizing the amount of times you're essentially bugging someone to check out what you have going on, and making sure that it's in an efficient way. It's in a way that will get you the best ROI, and essentially attract someone to what you have to offer. So I definitely would say, in addition to the ATS, a sourcing tool is something that's super helpful.
Yeah, and I imagine particularly in the sourcing tool, and I think Hire Tool kind of does this. I think pretty much most tech solutions do this, or maybe to different extents, but I'm really including a diversity and inclusion component there to help companies with diversity hiring as well. Yeah. Arran, same question for you. What's most essential?
So I think, again, and it kind of extends on, I guess, from Mary and Taja in some respects, but programmatic artificial intelligence. So programmatic advertising and using artificial intelligence to run efficient bid advertising to source candidates across multiple platforms. So rather than just sticking with single vendors for job boards or advertising to draw from a wide pool of candidates, utilizing artificial intelligence to track the most suitable and best cost-efficient bids to attract candidates towards your jobs automatically. You know, if you do some statistical reports about where most of the candidate traffic is, you'd be amazed to see that actually only 20% of the candidate flow traffic may only run through Indeed. There's still 80% of traffic out there across a broad range of thousands of sites that would be far too complex, far too timely and costly to manage or to try and effectively bid on a pay-for-performance basis. But obviously, AI does that for you now and is the most cost-effective way of getting the most efficient top of the funnel through applicant tracking system.
Yeah, well, let's see. It only took us, 8 or so minutes to finally bring up artificial intelligence, right? Bring up AI in the recruiting tech. So let's go there. Let's talk about that a little. Arran, I'll just continue with you for a moment. So I don't think I have to tell anybody here or anybody watching today that when it comes to AI, recruiting professionals have kind of a range of different responses to it. Some of them roll their eyes and just like, oh, whatever, AI, like it's overblown, overhyped. Some of them are scared of it. It's going to, the robots are coming for their jobs. So let's just, keep it real with people, right? Like, let's put aside all the buzz phrases and thoughts from a very practical perspective. What is the best, most effective, most efficient, most impactful way, most realistic and cost-effective way, I'm throwing a lot in there, right, to incorporate AI into your recruiting tools? What do you think, Arran?
So AI can be used for a number of applications. And sometimes I think it's a word that's thrown around too much without not necessarily a lot of context behind it, or sometimes even understanding from individuals. It's a buzzword. But AI is a fantastic use of technology to do recruitment process automation, RPA. Okay, so a lot of the original medial sort of mundane human tasks that we would have once done, where it was maybe sourcing, questioning, scheduling interviews, all of these things can now be done through a digital experience, which as consumers, whether we're a job seeker or we're buying something on Amazon, we're very used to doing things digitally and automatically now. It allows you to get to the human, the hiring manager, or the recruiter a lot quicker and more effective. So let's highlight the practical applications of AI. So you can use AI for semantics. You can use AI for sourcing and programmatic. You can use AI for shortlisting. You can use AI for chatbots. You can use artificial intelligence to intelligently plan calendars and put people in interviews at the right time. All of these points go hand in hand with then reducing the time to hire, which obviously is one of the three components: cost, time, and retention. Time is one of those ones that's really important for every company. It reduces time and reduces overhead costs of humans doing jobs that now artificial intelligence can automatically do themselves. So that's for me where AI sits and why it's so important.
Yeah, Mary, so I saw you nodding your head. I'm sorry that you're disagreeing with so much. I mean, agreeing with so much. I'd rather you disagree. But what were you nodding? Like, what was particularly resonating for you?
Yeah, Arran, I like how you kind of frame AI as a tool to like get to the human, whether that's the candidate or the hiring manager. And I think for me, how I think about it, and I'm coming from a place where I've long been doing recruiting at early stage startups. And so I am not seeing the kind of volume that you might see if you're a recruiter at Google or Apple or Amazon. But my take on it is largely, if you can spend time up front, you all are going to make me shut up. But if you can spend time up front really attracting like highly qualified candidates and being really transparent about what it looks like to work at your company, you'll have higher qualified leads to, again, borrow from marketing and sales. But I think like spending that time up front to clearly communicate what it looks like to work at your organization, and really understand the motivation of candidates, I think you can have like higher quality of applicants versus higher quantity. And I think a lot of times where people lean on AI is because recruiting is hard and you have a lot of tasks and you're scheduling and you're looking at resumes and there's a lot to do. But I think that rather than maybe applying a Band-Aid of AI, especially if you think about like ways to screen resumes, or I think that sometimes, not always, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a Band-Aid where your time might be better spent focusing on how do we attract higher quality of candidates versus higher quantity.
Yeah. So Taja, I see you nodding your head too. And just also to piggyback off of what Mary was just talking about, recruiting is hard, right? What do you think is the toughest part of recruiting? And how do you think specifically that challenge, problem, what is the best way for technology to help with that specific challenge?
Sure. So I would highlight the challenge is finding a happy medium between a quick and efficient process, but a thorough process so that you're not losing key candidates, which happens quite a bit, especially if you're working with startups, which I know you have experience with, Mary, who want to do everything so precisely. Their hiring process is typically their baby because you're adding, one person to a 20-person team, which is a huge percentage of their team. And if it goes wrong, it's an even bigger loss than at a larger corporation. So finding that happy medium, which AI does absolutely help with, it helps a lot with that front load of organizing, getting your jobs out there, sifting through resumes. But you still absolutely have to sort of have a human component, like Mary was saying, to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So sort of getting those two things together in the right way is probably the hardest part. But AI does help with that.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this, Scott, in terms of specifically AI and its, what role?
Even taking a step back before adopting an AI strategy in your attracting of talent, I think it's important to understand the cost of hiring the wrong person? Whether it's a manager or an executive, what does that look like? Because if you're going to invest a ton of money into some sort of platform to create a streamlined process, is it the same cost as what it would be to, attract the wrong person and then hire them and then have to restart, a year later, or to then hire the wrong manager and have 2, 3 people below them leave? So is it worth the real investment in adopting the technology? Most of my, AI experience is on the benefit administration side, where you need help with decision support technology. You have 4 plans available, and you can type in how many visits you expect to the doctor and how many prescriptions you pick up, and it'll tell you which plan to go with. From a recruiting standpoint, I can't provide too much input on AI.
Yeah, no, totally. One thing I want to talk about is this common kind of frustration that a lot of talent acquisition professionals have. Again, let's just keep this real here, right? A lot of companies are forced to use recruiting tech that is already embedded in their larger overall people management system, right? I don't want to name names because, I have my own reputation to try and protect. I don't know what reputation I have, but there are big HCM providers that have a recruiting arm to what they do. And oftentimes, recruiters are not happy with those. They prefer more of a best of breed solution. And so I'm wondering, number one, what advice would you have for recruiting professionals, talent acquisition professionals inside companies that are perhaps frustrated with the platform with that contains the recruiting arm, like with that platform that they're using, and maybe they're interested in it, kind of using a more of a best of breed approach to tackle specific recruiting challenges, whatever they are that they may have. What advice do you have to that, to that professional from a, technology point of view? Like, what is one to do? Like, Taja, what do you think? What would you say?
I think one thing that I would recommend is to, similar to what Scott mentioned, is to essentially note all of the investments that are being made in this software and maybe the gaps in which aren't being filled. So, what is the time cost? What is the actual monetary cost of utilizing this platform that isn't really working to its best ability? And what are the softwares or the tools that you can present to offset those investments? Sometimes that does take you jumping into potentially a free demo or just as much information as you can possibly provide to your manager, your higher up, to show that this is where we are, this is what we're losing by focusing here, and this is what we can potentially utilize in order to make that better.
Yeah, I think that sometimes a cost that doesn't get figured is the amount of labor that recruiters have to do to kind of compensate for what they view as poor technology, right? And that's not an easily quantifiable cost, like hours that people are spending on stuff. Arran, what do you think about this whole best of breed versus platform argument?
Yeah, so I think it actually goes back to a point again Scott Taja brought up, which comes down to measuring impact and cost. So statistically here in the US, when someone leaves a company, it's 33% of their annual salary. That's the cost. And the average time to hire in the US is 42 days. So if let's say you're on a system, and I will name some names, like if you're on like Taleo, or if you're on SuccessFactors, or you're on Connexa, or any one of these other ones, or Workday, for example, and you're on one of these platforms, and it doesn't quite work how you want it to work, or it's not necessarily vendor friendly in a sense of their partnership network for working with other recruitment tools to support its central kind of docking station as a platform for you. You could then look at, highlight to your employer and company, I believe we could reduce the time to hire by X amount of days. Every company in America measures revenue per employee. So if you reduce the time to hire by 1 day for every employee that they bring on through their just normal attrition, you can increase the revenue efficiencies of the business exponentially. And if you can make that into a financial case, then you could take that to a CFO. And if you take that to a CFO, they're going to support the numbers. And that's a really good way to start leveraging your way through the business to get what you want.
Yeah. Well, let's move along here in terms of getting what you want, right? I think this is a perfect segue from talking about this best of breed versus platform approach to the notion. I think it's pretty clear there's so many different options in terms of, third-party solutions, right? That you can bolt on to an ATS or not, or just different ATSs, et cetera. Lots of different options. And a lot of tech stacks, as a result, have become quite bloated, especially at larger organizations, right? Where you might have different departments that don't even realize what another department is using. And I saw a stat, and I should have brought it with me today, but I think something like the average company has an average of it was like 70 something, or solutions that they're using, which sounds crazy to me. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on this. Do you think that HR tech is bloated with too many options, or maybe this shows a more mature but more mature approach by companies, that they're adopting a lot of different solutions for niche problems? Mary, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to tag one thing onto the last question just because Arran did such a good job demonstrating it. But I think from a recruiter talent acquisition standpoint, I would also encourage people to lean on the salespeople at the HR tech company you're looking at and have them tell them what the resistance is, and have them they make that case all the time. So they're used to knocking those down. But to answer the question you just asked, I think it's both. I am definitely, if it's a spectrum, I'm on the side of there are more HR tech tools than are needed. But I think it's a really interesting time and industry. I think there is growing and understanding that investing in the people at your company is really important. And I think you see that with a number of HR tech tools coming up. I do think there are some really excellent HR tech tools out there that help us in our jobs. I also think that they can sometimes serve as a little bit of a Band-Aid for things as well, because, and again, I'm speaking from early stage startup, when you have a million things to do. I think sometimes skills and muscles that you should build earlier on as an organization, like creating a strong recruiting process with structured interviewing, is sometimes punted, and HR tech tools kind of fill that as a Band-Aid, and I think that's okay. But I think it's important to invest in building those skills internally as soon as you can.
Yeah, your answer was reminding me something that there's a tech solution, Cadient Talent, and their founder, Jim Buchanan, once told me, listen, you can have the best technology in the world, but if your hiring process really sucks, then all you're doing is automating a really bad hiring process.
That's a much more articulate version of what I was going for.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you're basically validating that too with your opinion. Scott, what do you think in terms of the number of different solutions that companies have been piling on?
So there are a ton of options out there. Whether you're looking at applicant tracking, onboarding, benefits, payroll, PTO, 401k, all of those systems, you want to basically interview all of the different people who would be touching this system and work with someone who can organize that for you. So you don't need to go out to 20 different carriers with an RFP. If you know that your CFO wants this, your HR person wants that, your payroll specialist wants this, work with a partner that can bring those solutions to you. Rather than having to do it on your own and interviewing 20 different companies, you work with an expert that can outsource it for you, and then also implement it for you and handhold throughout the process.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to that end, Scott, let me also ask you then, when it comes to, let's say you are a leader in a talent acquisition department, right? Or you're looking to evaluate technology, right? You're talking to vendors. What do you feel that, buyers of technology for their companies, what do you feel like they get wrong most of the time in their engagement with vendors? And what do you feel is maybe the top one or two questions that they should be asking their tech vendor to evaluate them?
Yeah. Well, I think the number one thing people get wrong is the amount of time and legwork it actually takes to get the system up and running, and the potential for disruption. If it's going to take 6 months for you to build out a new system, are people's paychecks going to be wrong? Are people's benefits going to be wrong? And, the FSA carryover, like there's so many little things that can be done incorrectly that you really need a third party who is an expert in building these systems to do it for you, to get it right the first time, because there's no room for error. That's my experience. I go through people coming and going with different systems all day long. And unless you know the bandwidth or you've been through the ringer of getting it done, you don't know what the process actually looks like.
Right. A lot of vendors, and in a former role, I used to do marketing. I was a marketing consultant for a lot of HR tech vendors. I'm not going to lie here. Like they will tell, not naming names either. The
salespeople are good these days. I'll tell you. The salespeople are very good these days. They go through extensive training. They know the questions. They know the headaches. They know, what keeps you up at night, and they will attack it, and they will sell you what you don't need.
Well, exactly, and that's where I was going. They will say, no, this is easy to implement. Like we've done this a million times. We can do this. You'll be up and running in 5 minutes. And it's like, no, you won't.
Yeah.
You won't. And I feel like also what happens is that they will present data. And I think that we can all do a better job of maybe like checking the validity and reliability of that data. But Taja, what do you think, in terms of evaluating vendors? Like what would you look for? What would you ask? What do you think people get wrong?
Sure. I think having so many options, sometimes it's a good or bad thing. Sometimes it forces you to evaluate what exactly you need internally, maybe a question you wouldn't have asked prior to having to do this research. And so I think the biggest question is figuring out exactly what you need. And just like Scott said, interviewing the right people internally, seeing what they feel like they need to do their jobs better. And then seeing also how those departments speak to one another, because maybe although you have 4 or 5 different vendors that you're working with or different platforms, do they speak to one another? Are there ways to integrate them to make it easier? So definitely asking the internal questions is the first thing that you should do before going to your vendors. You need to know what questions to ask them, and no better way than to reevaluate internal issues.
Yeah. Arran, anything to add in terms of evaluating vendors?
Well, I think we have to. So there are lots of vendors, and it almost can be a little bit, overbearing how many options we have out there to use as tools. But the positive that I would take from this is when you have lots of options, it gives you great leverage to negotiate. Okay, so we're sitting on the side of your company that you represent. You're now in the driving seat because you're not in the hands of just one vendor that can kind of hold you over a barrel as a supplier. You have this huge array of options and opportunities out there that you can leverage them against each other and say, hey, who's going to do me the best service, the best deal, and provide the best opportunity for our company to use you. The other part as well, I just wanted to say, which was kind of backtracked a little bit, is it might not feel like this, guys, but typically when you have lots and lots of vendors in an industry, that's actually a sign in the digital world of immaturity. Most of these vendors will get a level of success and then they will consolidate. You'll see everyone start buying each other and they'll all start consolidating into pyramids. And then in the end, there'll be a leader in chatbot. There'll be a leader in scheduling. There'll be a leader in benefits. And you'll see these leaders are sort of making their way now, but they'll start buying and consolidating everyone. That's typical of digital markets.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, overall, the theme that I got to is really like understand your pain points in your company and like your unique company in your industry, because, benchmarking is typically pretty difficult, when done externally, which leads to metrics, the question of metrics. We talk a lot in recruiting about time to fill, quality of hire. And the thing, especially with quality of hire, that's not benchmarkable between companies. Different companies measure that differently. So like Mary, I'm curious when it comes to metrics, right? Mm-hmm. If we're going to focus there for a moment, what do you think are the most important metrics that recruiting tech can help with, and how. And so before you say something like quality of hire, right? Like, what would you mean by that too? You know what I mean? So what are your views on metrics and technology's impact on them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I'm excited to hear everyone's answers, because I think that so many people have different ideas of like what are the most important recruiting metrics. I think like zoom out a little bit. I will answer it, but I think that rather than like having these are the specific metrics, I think it's important to have complementary metrics. Meaning that I think time to hire is helpful information, but I think it's always important to have some kind of complementary retention metric. So
Yes.
if you're looking at, we were joking a little bit about sales teams, but if you apply that same thought, if you think about like internally, if you think about recruiting, like sales and maybe like people ops, like customer success, you see that sometimes with sales and customer success, you will see a like common example of the sales team just like selling to anyone that they can. And then it comes to customer success and that new client turns quickly. So if you think about that, like recruiting, if you think about recruiting as sales, like I could hire anyone in 5 days and the like time to hire would look great. But then when you think about retention, I think it's really important to have those two complementary metrics. So I suppose I am arguing more for like a framework than these are the metrics you should look at. But I do think all the data is interesting. So if I were to pick two complementary metrics, I would maybe look at time to hire, but then I would also look at like past evaluation based on interview stage. And so I'd be wanting to see like, okay, how many people at the like project stage, what is their evaluation? Is it like, are people giving them typically good ratings, meaning we have a high quality of applicants making it to that stage, or everyone that makes it to the project stage, are they not making it through? So looking at the like pass-through rate at each stage. And then I think too, looking at some like retention metrics, again, thinking about like employee journey, like you might think about customer journey, and seeing like what are the milestones for people when they've been on the team at 3 months, 6 months, a year, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I'm glad you mentioned retention. I think, and I imagine perhaps you would agree with this, that even when looking at retention, it's really important to look at the different kinds of retention. There's turnover and then there's regrettable turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And people can be staying at a company for all the wrong reasons. They're lazy, they suck, they become complacent, and you have a crappy performance management system. So people aren't leaving. That's not good retention, right? So I think to your point, Mary, it's really looking at like a whole range of statistics metrics to tell that story. Taja, I see you nodding your head. Metrics, what do you say about metrics?
So my favorite metric to pay attention to is the number of applicants we've gotten per job source or job board. And hearing Mary mention that toward the end of her response, seeing per interview stage, what those metrics are. That's also something that's really important to me when seeing what sources applicants have come through. That's kind of a piece of how I measure quality of hire. If we posted to a very specific niche board that costs $600 for 60 days, but we only got 2 applicants that never even made it to stage 2 of interviews, are we going to post there again? Was it potentially related to the industry or the job location or the specifics about the responsibilities? It just gives us a good springboard of thinking about what we're going to do when we're creating these job marketing plans. So that's my favorite metric that I'm always looking into, no matter what I'm hiring for at the time.
Yeah. We have a question that came in and a comment on it too. And it has to do with, I'll just read the question. How different is remote only teams for recruiting tools versus in-office or mostly office teams? Again, in terms of recruiting tools, right? Are they different if you're never in person? Arran, any thoughts on that? Or anyone really? Yeah.
I think realistically, especially with the current climate, even though we seem like we're coming out the other side of it, I think that the amount of tools that we have available have coped very well with remote working and remote onboarding. I actually think for the purposes of time and effort, things like video interviewing tools are far more effective in some respects because it makes scheduling a lot easier. It makes it easier just to be able to just interview a candidate like quicker, rather than like, right, I'm going to be in the office next Tuesday. But like, if you're free in the next 30 minutes, we can jump on a video and I'll talk to you, So for me personally, on my side, I don't see a difference in a sense of a difference in tools or a lack of because of remote. I also believe that hybrid work conditions and working remote is here to stay. So I think that realistically, recruitment tools will adapt to that even more.
You mentioned video interviewing tools, which is probably the most often cited tools that get referenced when talking about remote hiring and remote work. Just to be clear, when you say video interviewing tools, like I assume, like we're not talking about what we're doing right now, like, where it's synchronous, where, you get on Zoom and you do an interview. There's, of course, other types of work, what are usually referred to as video interviewing tools, which are more asynchronous, like candidates sort of get their answers recorded by video. I'm just going to put this out there. I effing hate those tools. I think that they do damage to the candidate experience, and it's very easy to cite, which vendors I hate in particular, but I would never. And so I'm wondering if anyone has thoughts, particularly around asynchronous interviewing tools, again, where candidates just sort of like have their answers recorded on the screen. Anyone want to jump in with any strong opinions on that? Either way, either direction.
Yeah, I mean, not being as ever part of the interview process, I think that's a terrible idea. You're not having it's not a natural conversation. You can know what the questions are going into it and know what the responses should be, and you're not necessarily getting the most qualified candidate throughout the interview process. I think there needs to be some sort of human interaction, even if it's as basic as a Zoom call. To have someone just record a 30-second answer, there's enough ways, I think, to get around that, to say the right buzzwords to get to the next stage.
Yeah. You mentioned human interaction. It reminds me, I was at a conference once. It was actually an ERE event several years ago, where there was a founder of a startup who was just really ecstatic about his solution, which was, oh my God, everybody, guess what? There's going to be no interaction between candidates and hiring managers or recruiters, right? People will get hired with and he was developing this as if this was a great thing. And I wanted to be polite, and I smiled, and I'm just like, why are you trying to ruin this for everyone? I see you smiling. So what are your thoughts? I'm curious about the evolution of technology, which a lot of people do feel is stripping away some of that human interaction that candidates actually like, especially in interviewing. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with your sentiment and how strong it is. I don't like those tools. I think they not only terrify the candidate oftentimes, and don't necessarily give you their full selves in that experience, but it also takes away the opportunity to probe. You can have a set list of questions for a candidate, and that set list is never going to be exactly the same for every person. They're just a springboard for you to get the appropriate information as a foundation. But you always have different probing questions for those candidates. And it's just not fair to not have the ability to do that. So when it comes down to these sorts of technologies, I think we have to be very careful, not only because of the experience that the candidate gets, but also the fact that if we are moving into, an almost 100% remote world, that's the only little bit we have left, is to actually have an opportunity to interface, even if it's through video. So if we strip all those away, we'll never see who we're working with. We'll never get a chance, especially for the candidates, to make a decision on if this manager is the right person for me to be working this closely with. So that's sort of my thought process around that. I don't know a ton of tools, their names, or things like that, but I just know that we should be very wary about how we use them and how many we implement that sort of get rid of that human interaction.
Yeah, no, I think there's a comment from Megan Gottschall here. Interviewing is hard enough as it is, like, damn, you know? So yeah, we had another question come in, and maybe we can just do a round robin on this. What's everybody's favorite tool or app that they have found to be most valuable? Mary, why don't we start with you?
Yes, I will pull out. I am not currently using it because I think it only integrates with Greenhouse, but there is a tool called Guide that I just think like the user interface is really nice, and it is essentially a link you can send to a candidate where they have kind of a personalized landing page about who they'll be speaking to and what to expect from the interview in times that feel like a lot longer ago. You could include things like our office runs cold, wear a jacket, those kind of details that I think really show how thoughtful you're being about the candidate experience. So Guide.
Yeah, Scott, what about you besides maybe your own tool?
Well, we have an app where we can basically put all of your benefit information in a digital wallet. It also will track your deductibles, co-insurance amounts, and anything that you're spending out of pocket. In addition, it has telemedicine built into it. So for us, it's really important to being able to communicate with employees. And if we can do so and keep everything kind of succinct, it's really a win for all people, because maybe you guys can agree, less and less are people or current employees reading emails from HR. So you kind of have to go at it a different way. You know, so if it's an app based, no one likes that red circle anymore on their screen. So it's another way to get people to read information.
Right, well, everybody knows employees hate HR. Let's not try and sugarcoat that. Arran, what do you think most indispensable tool?
Well, I really love job.com. So I'm only joking. I think the kind of rise of the chatbots, like personally naming one, I think Maya is a really, really clever tool. I don't know if you guys have used it and stuff, but they've got a really, really slick, kind of very natural speaking bot, in my opinion. And obviously being a person that's quite passionate about artificial intelligence, I know how difficult that is. And I think for sort of, the maths kind of, short questioning and screening and kind of getting people through, I think is a very useful tool. I just want to say though, just because we had this debate about the whole the video interviewing piece, and I'm going to throw it out there. For the Generation Z, who spend their lives filming each other on Snapchat and TikToks and YouTubes, talking to cameras that aren't talking back to them, I'm not so sure if it's not that suitable for them in the future. Sadly, I'm not a Gen Z, but I do believe that as they come through as the generation, millennial generation I am, but as the next generation come through, I think that they will be more receptive to that, in my opinion. But I do agree with all the points you said. I think they are very cold sometimes. I think they are very hard to get the candidates and their character across and who they work with. But I think this next generation has grown up in such an environment now that they're used to maybe dealing with that a lot more than we were growing up.
Yep.
That's great to know. Great perception.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I was just going to say, great, fair point. I'm just really old, so Snapchat,
all right,
TikTok, what? We have about a minute left. I would love to just go around the room and everyone trying as succinctly as possible, and maybe just finish the sentence. The future of recruiting technology is, Taja, go.
The future of recruiting technology is vast, and definitely there's so much room to create tools that just have different elements to them that can really help us. So
right on. Scott, what do you think?
I think the future of recruiting is on a great track. We have a ton of tools available. and the world is your oyster. It's really just a matter of what your preferences are, and go out and get it.
Get it. Mary, future recruiting tech is?
I want to say education based. I think there's a really big opportunity to teach people how to recruit well versus here's how to.
Yep, I like that. Yeah. Arran, I'm going to give you the last one on this.
Blockchain. I believe it's blockchain. I believe the validation of data, because statistically, if you Google it, 85% of candidates lie during the hiring process, and 46% of them are failing the first 18 months because of it in some way, shape, or fashion. We all do background checks, reference checks, and various other checks as a constant data exhaust that none of us share as information data points amongst ourselves in all our different organizations. If you create an irrefutable ledger of blockchain that makes that information validated and available to everyone, it brings order in chaos. And I believe the future of hiring is very much technology is underpinned with blockchain technology.
Good. Well, we are at time. We're like a minute over. So thank you, everyone. Thank you all, 4 of you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. And I hope everybody who joined today enjoyed this conversation. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the event. And I encourage everyone to connect with everyone. Find all of our panelists, find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., and connect, right? And with that said, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Have we stopped broadcasting?
I think we did. Maybe we still are. I clicked to stop. But are you sure?
Vadim,